Hello, I'm Toycat, and here's a wild news story. Trump has suggested that Canada could become the 51st state. This is obviously a wild headline, and it's actually slightly inaccurate, because if you read what Trump actually said, he suggested that really Canada could become a state or two, specifically clarifying that he means the two states should become a conservative one and a liberal one. This is obviously how the US used to add states as a compromise way back in the founding of the country, but it's a wild thing for the leader of any country to suggest that maybe they could just annex their neighbor. So how does that come about? How serious of an offer was that? And indeed, why is Trudeau speaking to the president-elect and going through such a big deal to prevent these tariffs? It is something that Canada is very worried about. And in fact, the biggest Canadian province by population has actually launched an ad campaign in the US, reminding them, look, we're friends, you don't need to do this to us. A very interesting thing for a country and province to do. But let's dive into that, as well as the big question, which is, okay, if for some reason the US and Canada were to merge, it was a peaceful thing, if it's an annexation, whatever the case may be, would Canada become the 51st state? This is the lazy and I think slightly American way of seeing things, that like, yeah, that's one state, but Canada has provinces, and so Canadians would say, no, it should be 10 more states, but I think the actual answer is somewhere in between. It's one of my favorite hypotheticals, and I'd love to talk about it, but first, we need to dive into this crazy claim from Trump, because this actually comes from Fox News, so keep in mind they have a certain bias. That is an important thing. It doesn't mean it's not accurate news, it just means keep in mind the slant, and also keep in mind that this slant does come with the caveat that, yeah, this news actually is from two people who are at the table. It's not from Trudeau or from Trump, the leader of Canada and the United States respectively. It's from people who are at the table, who heard the discussion, and they paraphrased the discussion to the reporter who is now sharing it. So just keep in mind the layers removed from it actually is. However, this does sound like a real thing that happened, because Trump became more animated when it came to the US trade deficit, and obviously he said that there's over $100 billion deficit between what Canada sells to the US and what America sells to Canada, and basically he says that if you can't fix the border issues and the trade deficit, there'll be a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods on day one when he returns to office. This is a very big thing, so Trudeau says, wow, you can't levy that tariff because it would kill the Canadian economy completely, and Trump replied, so if your country can't survive unless it's ripping off the US to the tune of $100 billion, maybe you should become the 51st state, and then saying that Prime Minister is a good title, but you could still be governor of the 51st state. I think that this is very clearly a joke, and I feel like that is a thing that Trump does right, and the easiest example of this is this is a real tweet from the president-elect of the United States. Objectively hilarious, yes, but also like, ooh, that's a crazy thing to do to like someone else's territory. So I think that if you just say like, oh yeah, this is a person who jokes, he's not actually being very serious about the 51st state offer. He's just saying, yeah, we are going to charge you for what we believe is you ripping us off, unless you can fix the you ripping us off part. And if you don't like either part of that, well, we have some places that are allowed to rip us off, and we call them states. So, when we feel California's ripping us off, we can't tariff them because they're inside of our economy. And so maybe that's the rough thing that he's saying there, but it's still very much, I think, a joke beyond the, oh yeah, you could join us, or you work out how not to rip us off, which is very much the view that Trump has taken. Trump has taken the view that as president twice now, that basically a trade deficit is a country ripping someone off. And this is interesting because, like I mentioned, Ontario, the biggest province of Canada by population, has actually launched a major ad campaign saying, yeah, this it's from Premier Doug Ford, saying that the tariff threat is similar to a family member stabbing you right in the heart, and it's because there's such a large amount of trade, about 350 billion worth, and indeed, what I found was interesting is that the US primary export destination in 17 states is Ontario, literally just Ontario alone, and so this made me realize, like, okay, what's going on with this? And I had to look up the ad campaign, and here it is from the Toronto Sun of all places.
For generations,
and as you can see,
this ally to the north,
it is a campaign they're going to be playing in America.
Ontario, Canada, a partner connected by shared history, shared values.
It's just all about trying to say,
vision.
look, we were best friends. We fought a war together. We built a bridge together. Is this really how they built it? I don't actually know. Anyway, you get the idea that they have this big campaign that is here to try and get the US to say, look, we are your friends. You should not, try and ruin your friend's economy, basically. And this is, again, something that comes down to, very broadly, the view of the US, which is, or the view of the current administration of the US, which is when you sell things to the US, that is actually the US giving you money. When the US buys things when the US sells things to you, That is you giving the US money, and you need to balance these two amounts. Trade is a good thing, but only when it's balanced, is an interesting New World Order view. Again, there is a small chance that is the correct way to view money in the modern world. It's not how most economists agree on things, but basically they say, look at this big list of our biggest economy trading partners, Canada being the very biggest, by the way, and keep in mind, if Canada is the biggest US partner, because Canada is about a tenth the size of the US and much more integrated into the US economy. For Canada, it's an even bigger deal for their relationship. So this is the very first one, if you're President Trump, you take aim at. It is one of the biggest trade balance deficits at 50 billion, although according to Trump, he reckons it's 100 billion, so who's to say? But the point is there is a very large amount of money that Trump believes, and indeed, maybe in a while, you could make some argument that if money wasn't printable and infinitely creatable, and that you can actually benefit from trade, but you could make an argument that, yeah, there's just 50 billion that leaves the country, and we don't want that anymore. 100 billion leaves the country to go to Mexico, which is obviously bigger, 350 for China, which is why I think every trade war you've seen in his first term was with China, more or less, with the slightest bit aimed at the European Union, and indeed, only a few countries actually have positive trade balances with the US. The United Kingdom, I'm surprised to learn, we buy more from them than they do from us. Must be all the dodgy drinks from convenience stores. We've got the Netherlands buying way more than us even, which is crazy on a per capita level. Brazil's up there, Singapore's up there, Belgium, Australia, Hong Kong, and Chile, and Colombia. And so you look at though, but if you look at the amount of countries that are positive, you look at the amount of countries that are negative, and if you view the world through the lens of money changes hands and the goods are all just coincidentally there, or rather that we could produce these goods ourselves and not give money to Canada, Japan, or China, then that is the view that leads you to saying, wow, we're getting ripped off, we need to do something serious, which is why, you know, like, again, if you're Ontario, or indeed if you're Prime Minister of Canada, or Governor of Canada, Trudeau, as apparently some people like to see it, but if you're Prime Minister of Canada, you look at that and you go, please see a different economic model. I understand that in one view of the world you're saying this, but in the view of the world that every other country and your country most of the time uses, this is not very good. And so that's kind of the big war right now, is like, try to survive without your economy being decimated, because the interesting thing about the US being the world's largest economy is that any one of these trading partners, even, you know, again, if we take the absolute biggest trading partner of Canada, sure, if the US loses all of this trade, let's just say the trade vanishes and the goods aren't rebought anywhere else, they lose 600 billion. And so for the US, that's losing, you know, like a 20th of their, slightly less than a 20th even, like that's like 3 or 4% of their economy. For Canada though, losing 600 billion of trade is equivalent to losing, let's go to the GDP, 2.5 trillion. That's about a quarter of the economy that is wrecked right there. That is a very crazy difference, and that is the difference that even if you don't believe in the trade balance, you can use to your advantage. You can use, and whether that's true or not, I'm not going to make a comment on. I don't know whether Trump is engaging in brinkmanship of like basically saying you have more to lose than us, so we can get a more favorable relationship regardless of the fact. But what I am saying is that you are in the better negotiating position when you are the world's largest economy, because everyone you trade with, you are a more significant part of their trade pie than they are for yours. With the UK, this is, again, we're talking about 1/10 of the relationship with Canada. Actually, about 1/5 of the relationship with Canada. Even though the UK is in the positive, that doesn't mean the UK can go to America and say, you guys are ripping us off to the tune of 5 billion. You know these flags and this Diet Pepsi with no caffeine in it I've got? I'm buying this from you, but you aren't buying my videos, Americans. I think you should be forced to buy my videos, and we'll tariff the Diet Pepsi if you don't otherwise. It would be a weird thing to say, but, you know, you could argue that's what you can do. But so that's why, you know, I think that's why this is a conservative stance to take, which is like, yeah, there is a slight amount of might makes right on this, and like, well, if we can negotiate the better deal for Americans, the people who elected this man, why wouldn't you? And there's a very valid argument to that. But I want to dive into the more interesting part of this whole thing, which is not like the trade wars, which will continuously be going on. Again, I feel like Canada is the for better and worse, whenever things go down in America, if those things are good, Canada can be the biggest beneficiary, and if those things are bad internationally, they can be the biggest loser. And so that's where Justin Trudeau is kind of at. And I think think actually it's worth mentioning that even though this sounds like a Trudeau problem, it's actually kind of his successor problem. I think it's not a crazy thing to say that if you look at the 2021 Canadian federal election, the Liberal Party didn't even win. They got less votes than the second place party. And it's not like since then, like, oh yeah, but there's been a shift from Liberal to Conservative. The opinion polls for the next Canadian election are, I think, to put it mildly, I don't think he's going to be the next Prime Minister unless something crazy happens. If he negotiates a really good deal, maybe that would convince Canadians to vote for him. But it looks like there's going to be another Canadian Prime Minister, one who is actually conservative. Does that work well with Trump? Trump does make all sorts of weird comments about, like, not liking people based on their politics. And so maybe it works well for Canada to elect a conservative just on that level. I don't know. This is kind of a fun thing that you can debate for yourself. But yeah, Canada is having another election. It's one of the more exciting ones in the world, by the way. This and Germany, I think, are the big ones to watch in 2025. But yeah, the point is that Canada is, at least, looking at the map, it's like broadly, like a liberal country. Because even though it's 33% of people who vote for Liberal and Conservative, another 17% of people vote for an even lefter party than the Liberal Party, if you can broadly simplify Canadian politics that way. And the Bloc Québécois, just imagine they don't exist, okay? It's the easiest way to believe a lot of things to do with Quebec politics. And so if you look at that, you're like, okay, so Canada is a very liberal province, which is one of the reasons why, even if the US actually came to the table and said, okay, you do this, or you do this, or we can annex you, and you can become governor. I actually don't think, even to become governor of this 51st state, I don't actually think that the US wants to annex Canada. Like, there's a lot of reasons why they haven't, the biggest being that would be a lot of upset to cause, internationally and domestically. And I think the other big reason is, if you partially look at it on, like, an electoral, front, obviously, Canada, were it to join the US as one state, would immediately become the largest state. California used to have more people than Canada, but now Canada, because of high immigration, has slightly edged ahead. So if you look at the basic 270 to win graph, we'll go for right here, you can see California already gets 54 electoral votes. You'd be giving like 55, 56 electoral votes to Canada, and effectively you're saying here is a formerly foreign country that gets to decide our elections. And regardless of what you think about who should win, blue or red, the fact that there is a huge imbalance that basically shifts towards one direction means that not only does, the president become way more likely for one party than the other, but also if we go to the House, that's why I had this map up, if right now it's like on a knife edge, even in a red sweep, it becomes impossible to win the House unless you're the blue party, or at least unless the red party moves more left. Maybe you could argue for American politics that's a good thing, but if Americans don't agree, the Senate too, there would be a few extra senators, and if it's, I think right now is one of the few points in time where having two extra senators on one side or the other wouldn't have it swing over, but just keep that in mind. So now that means we can go to this map and we can say, how should Canada join the United States? If for some reason it has to happen, Canada says, look, we're doing it whether you like it or not, and there's a clause in the US Constitution that says you have to annex Canada when we ask you to, and we do, and then, or Trump's on board, or whatever the imaginary hypothetical scenario is, then how would Canada join the US? Well, so again, the easiest way to think about this is like, oh yeah, Canada becomes a brand new state. So we'll color it all in blue for now, shall we? And so there is just going to be a brand new country up here to the north, and this is one state. But this is ignoring the fact that Canada is actually made up of 10 provinces. I think each of those provinces would probably have to individually agree. I'm not entirely sure what the Canadian not actually a Canadian constitution, right? But I don't know what the Canadian set of documents that forms a constitution actually has to say about joining a foreign power, and if they can do so about the province's consent. But even if so, this isn't the right way to join, because Canada has territories, and so those territories would become US territories, directly or indirectly. And so immediately you actually have to clarify the Yukon as a territory, you have to clarify the Northwest Territories are a territory, and the other one is Nunavut, I think. And so this is how it actually looks. These become a Puerto Rico-like entity, or a US Virgin Islands-like entity, and then, did you know there's a little island over there that belongs to Nunavut and not to Ontario? That's interesting to me. That feels a little separated. We could give that to Ontario or Quebec or whatever. But this is this is the logical way to do it. But then if you wanted to go the Trump way, then the logical way you would do it is say, okay, what are the conservative states? Looking at the election results, Alberta, Calgary is the big city, a lovely big city, by the way, one of the cool big cities. So Calgary is the big city in Alberta, and Alberta is very blue, and so is Saskatchewan. They are literally so blue. conservative like rest of the world, not American blue. They're so conservative that they don't have a single liberal MP between them, and so you're clearly going to add those, and Manitoba's going to fit in there too. And so you actually end up with a cut. If you were to make liberal and conservative, you end up with a country split that looks like this. So Saskatchewan goes yellow, let's say, to keep things simple. Manitoba can go yellow along with Alberta. You end up with two states and it looks like this. But then you say, well, that's kind of silly, right? You can't have a state that looks like this and like that. So then you say, okay, well, add British Columbia, and even though British Columbia is quite liberal, one of the more liberal, overall this balances to conservative Canada and to liberal Canada, to Democrat Canada and to Republican Canada. Would they vote for the Republicans? It's a really fun discussion you can have another time. But this is how you would do it. But even then, I think this is actually slightly accurate. So let's go ahead and let's make all of those territories into red places, just to say they are part of the US now, or their US territories or whatever. Let's turn those into red, and let's say that actually this isn't that logical either, because the Maritimes, especially when you get to Newfoundland, the Maritimes and Ontario and Quebec as one province does seem a little wacky. Quebec certainly isn't going to like that. So maybe what you actually have to do is you make Quebec its own province, but then you do that and you're like, wow, you can't have Quebec be one province. That doesn't make any sense, does it? You can't have this little disconnect between Ontario and the Maritimes. So then you need to make Ontario a different color, which we'll make white for now because we've run out of other ones. And I think this is the logical way that you would add Canada to the United States. If, again, for whatever reason, either side got so on board with it and the other side just kind of went along with it, this is how you would do it. Canada couldn't become 2 states, I don't think. I think you'd have to make it 4. And so if Canada became 4 states, there would be, well, what is it, like 58 senators? Maybe you could argue 2 of them go red, 6 of them go blue. You could make a whole fun thing about it. But the reality is what would actually happen, for better and for worse, depending on where you live in the US, is US politics would change to account for the new 11% of the population that are just joining. In fact, is it 11%? Let's find out. So the population of Canada, I'm just going to use, just going to solely be simple here and use Wikipedia's population figures. So Canada's population, according to this, is about 41 million as of Q3 2024. And the United States' population is about... what do we got right here? It's about 334 million. So it's about 1/8 of the population, slightly under. If about 1/8 of the population suddenly joins all at once, the whole of politics is going to have to change, partially because there are now new issues of like integration, but partially because the average voter has shifted to the left on certain issues, to the right on very specific ones, but more to the left than to the right? And so that is the actual thing that would happen. The entire political establishment would change, or more fun, because we're going into hypothetical magic land anyway, is Canada would keep its political parties, and they would just all go to the House of Representatives in DC, and you get a weird situation, kind of like you do the Bloc Québécois, where Quebec elects its own MPs, and it's a whole own weird thing. You could have a situation like that. That's what happens in the UK of Scotland. Maybe that's what would happen in the US with Canada. Is it going to happen though? 99.99% chance of no. But you never know. In the same way, I think the biggest reason, though, if I'm being honest, if I'm trying to give advice to Mr. Trump, if he's like, "Hey, Toycat, I've heard you make the best geography videos. I've heard many good things about your videos, the best on the planet." Actually, this is a real conversation we had. But if he says this to me, then what would I say in response? I would say, "Mr. President-elect." Or do you say president, because he was a president? Mr. Former President and current President-elect Trump, I would say that annexing Canada is a bad decision, because then you would border France. Can you do that to yourself? Can you be the president who is known as the man who borders St. Pierre and Miquelon? I don't think so. And so I think that Canada, for all of the other reasons that I haven't mentioned in this video, plus that one, are probably going to be staying as a country. And Canada, I'm excited for your election. I have a lot of fun things to say about it. And I also am excited for all of the other things that are going on. I think Canada, genuinely, this is a weird thing to say after all of the things I've just gone into. I think Canada is more on the up and up as a country than the US. This tariff thing might be the thing that stops it, but as a population share, Canada has been growing. As a economy, they've been growing dynamically. I think the bigger issues are their deal with the US and indeed wages more general. But Canada is a country which is broadly doing pretty well, and they don't even have any enemies besides India. And if you're gonna have an enemy, right? If you're Canada, the best enemy to have in the world, like, besides, like, North Korea. In fact, North Korea is 9,000 kilometers away. India is 12,000. I think, genuinely, could you pick a better enemy? Sri Lanka, maybe. Or Australia? No, like, I think South Africa might be, or Madagascar, actually. So, yeah, if you're Canada, and you have to pick an enemy, and every country has one, I think picking an enemy all the way over there, real smart decision. You have to fly over, like, 12 different countries. One of them's Russia. One of them's the North Pole. It's not a country, but we'll go with it. One of them is where there's I hear there's a new hotel being built. But the point is I think you're doing really great as a nation, and I think I'm very excited to see where that goes. Presumably as an independent country. Do you like that I have a Canada flag for this video? Probably came from China, right? If only someone could fix that trade relationship. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. And second chat, if you would like to support videos like this that are diving deep into the fun things, consider supporting on Patreon. I use the money to buy Diet Pepsi of no caffeine or burgers. And if you want to give me more of those, you can. Oh, I ordered a burger right before this. I'll see if it's arrived. Got some good news. It is arriving in 7 minutes. So I'll just hang around here for a bit and say second channel, don't care. Goodbye.